Now we will move forward to the next section because we have a very agenda, and we're gonna resume and we're gonna talk about what we have discussed so far. So now I'm gonna open the next section in which Dr. Diana Matallana, Dr. Felipe de Brigad, and Dr. Michael Niconchuk, which is part of the Beyond Conflict Initiative. We give the floor to Diana Matallana now. Oh, but before Professor Michael Niconchuk, he is the director of the Trauma and Violent Conflict Program at the Beyond Conflict Initiative. Professor Nikonchuk join us online.
A todos,
Hello,
bueno, primero no soy ni
hello
profesor ni
everyone.
doctor.
First, I'm not a professor nor a doctor. I have a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience from a university in London. Daré mi charla en inglés porque el trabajo y la investigación ha sido en inglés, así que me ayuda a pensar mejor en inglés.
Um, and for full disclosure, my
Y
colleague,
para
Doctora
divulgar,
Vivian Kedari, who's a wonderful and fantastic colleague, was supposed to be here today with us, and I hope that I can fill her big shoes. Um, it's really an honor to be here because Emile, Dr. Bruno was such a close colleague and friend, as Boaz knows. I had the pleasure of working with him for several years. Emile was one of the initiators of our work at Beyond Conflict and really inspired our vision to integrate social cognitive neuroscience, social psychology, and other subfields of cognitive science into our understanding of how we do peace building programs and how we pursue conflict resolution around the world. We started this work probably 10 years ago, an initial engagement that brought together folks like many of whom were in this room with individuals that had lived through conflict, some from Colombia, some from Guatemala, Chile, Indonesia, and places like Bahrain, Rwanda, the Congo, countries around the world that had lived through similar conflicts. Not similar in the actual details of who was fighting who, but similar in the sense that there were shared dynamics, us, them, other, oppressed, oppressor, these deeply ingrained and entrenched identities that don't simply disappear once a conflict is over. My own family, my mother is from Guatemala, and I knew through being raised by a mother from Guatemala who lived through the conflicto armado that the identities that get formed and entrenched during cycles of violence do not go away even in the medium and long term after guns are put down, after any acuerdos de paz, in places where acuerdos de paz have been achieved. So when we started this work, we wanted to bring together individuals who were doing the research, really conducting research both in labs and in applied settings, research that we knew could improve how we were doing the work on the ground. I myself came from a practitioner background. I have worked for the past 10 years in mental health and psychosocial support programs for refugees individuals who have been participants in violent extremist movements or in armed movements in general. And the process of laying down your arms, the process of reintegrating into society, the process
armarse, de
of
reintegrarse
communities
a la
being
sociedad.
willing to let you
Ahora me escucho yo otra
reintegrate
vez.
is not a simple one. And it requires all of the might that we have of scientists, of researchers, of scholars, of practitioners, and of individuals with lived experience in this space. For the past several years, Beyond Conflict has been engaged in different places around the world on a premise that science is a right, that individuals and communities have an access not only to current findings from neuroscience, from social psychology that can be useful, but they have a right to also dictate how these findings are being guided to transform interventions in their communities. Neuroscience, cognitive science writ large, offers something that very few other fields offer in this space, insofar as it is transcontextual. There is a tremendous field of cultural neuroscience, and we know that the way that my brain and body interact with my environment is in many ways influenced by the culture, the norms, the setting which we grow up in, how we form relationships, the degree to which we're bonded to others in our community versus independent. But at the same time, the human heart, the human liver, the immune system, there's so many shared elements of this across space, time, and culture. And by using neuroscience, by promoting neuroscience, cognitive psychology, as a method of understanding better the human condition and a way to better understand how we can work towards peace and conflict resolution has tremendous power, not only in countries where there is division, but across cultures and times. We recently were engaged in a project in Colombia with colleagues at the US Institute of Peace, working with a group of religious leaders, of evangelical pastors and Catholic priests in Medellin, who have been hosting and dealing with some of the psychosocial challenges of migrants from Venezuela and communities in the Bajo Cauca region that have been exposed to cyclical forms of violence for many, really, generations. And one thing that they were very skeptical of is, okay, you're a team of psychologists and neuroscientists. We have our history of using faith, our faith traditions, to provide what we need to our populations. There was hesitancy, there was resistance. People wanted to start every session talking about the effects of trauma on the brain and the body with prayer. And instead of us being opposed to it, we were actually incredibly all for it because the way that we integrate neuroscience and cognitive psychology to promote peace building is by complementing these already existent, enduring forms of knowledge. Trauma and conflict have been around a lot longer than neuroscience, and communities have found ways to cope and to heal and to overcome. Yet we also have seen continued division, continued polarization, and entrenched identity politics that have really not found solutions that seem to be scalable. And one way that we have been really promoting the use of neuroscience and of cognitive psychology is by offering it as a complementary perspective that there is nothing threatening about the use of neuroscience for peace building initiatives. There shouldn't be anything threatening about it. If we're presenting it in a threatening way, there's a problem with us as a scientific community, not with the receiving community. It's not intended to be a cudgel that we beat people over the head with, that, oh, some science will help this work. No, this is about partnership, deep and intense partnership with communities who have lived through violence and conflict for generations, who have tried time and time again to overcome. And so, how we integrate neuroscience in communities to create approaches that are scalable and sustainable, really, I see the most promise on two key fronts. The first is in design, how we design interventions. And Boaz, I know Professor Hamiri has
Sí,
talked about this many
sí,
times with
eso,
me and in his presentation, of
eso,
course,
y
that there's
eso
ways that we can
pues
design
en el
interventions, if
camino
it's
de diseñar
communication, if it's
intervenciones,
social contact
es
programming, whatever it might
comunicación,
be, there's
es
ways to design
programación
interventions
social,
that are more
ayudar en las
informed by cutting edge
intervenciones
findings from
que se
neuroscience.
fundamenten en
Neuroscience
análisis y
offers us a way
evaluación
to challenge our
neurocientífica.
existing
La
assumptions about what works and
neurociencia
what doesn't. It doesn't
ofrece
offer a
medios
panacea. Knowing
neurolingüísticos base a
what part
nuevos
of someone's brain is lighting up when they're
saber qué parte
processing a
del
certain
cerebro
piece
de
of
alguien se
information or being
combina con el
exposed to
proceso
a certain
científico de
stimulus only
información
gets us so
al
far.
estar expuesta a
Understanding
diferentes
what's going
estímulos
on
y
in the brain as
conocimiento
far as
nuevo,
blood
pero
flow and
comprender lo que
oxygen
ocurre en el cerebro.
when someone is going through a
Me sigo yendo.
process of a mindset shift or an attitudinal shift or even forgiveness, as Dr. De Brigar will talk about, this is helpful and useful insofar as we're able to take that information and change how we design programs, taking what communities already know how to do and infusing them with those little bits of insights to change the way that that program is done, to change the way we conduct an intergroup contact program or a radio program or a television program, whatever the intervention that we want to do is, the science and the evidence offers us a way to complement what communities already have that innate knowledge to know how to do. And the second is, of course, in the evaluation front. For so many years, I've seen the peace building sector be stuck in not knowing how to evaluate the work that they do, to understand effectiveness. And we have many, many new survey tools and ways of generating insights, but we also are seeing increased integration of more advanced techniques. And some of the wearable technologies, for example, that we see used by neuroscientists around the world are becoming more and more um, readily deployable and adaptable in field settings. And it's incredibly encouraging to see how we can have a better marriage of some of this advanced technology, which has so often been used only in lab settings and with advertisement agencies, now being able to bring that into spaces where we're looking at really the embodied nature of conflict and of peace. In the same way that we know how conflict can do tremendous damage to the brain and to the body and to our social experience in the world, we also are really seeing tremendous promise in the integration of these cutting edge technologies to be able to change the way that we measure how peace can be achieved in these same communities. And I really am looking forward to the other colleagues diving more deeply into specific interventions. But I wanted to leave it with a general comment of having worked with Emil, with Andres, with Boaz for several years. We're really seeing neuroscience as offering a complementary path to liberation and to agency of communities. We're seeing a new generation of activist scientists in our work around the world, whether it's in Colombia or training police and hospital staff in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, or the work that I've been doing in the Middle East in teaching young refugees about the effect of stress and trauma on the brain. What we're trying to do is to use science as a tool for liberation, for increasing individuals' agency, to design interventions that make sense in their context, but also ensuring that we're not contributing to the knowledge inequalities that exist in the world. The ability to design scientifically informed interventions is something that the scientific community has to pursue by making findings readily available and accessible and understandable to communities while maintaining the highest ethical standards in doing that. And so I just wanted to frame this overall sense of where we at Beyond Conflict have seen this sector take shape. And I'm really excited to continue to learn from the rest of the colleagues who are here. Um, and thank you to all of the organizers for doing this event in honor of our friend and colleague, Dr. Emile Bruneau. I look forward to hearing lessons learned from our other colleagues.